Hello, welcome to the latest episode of The Invisible Men. Hey, Nique, how are you?
I'm well, Ian. Again, I'm excited this week because we've got someone that doesn't follow the rules, that
It's
does
so,
what's in the best interest of our country and accepts accountability and responsibility for that. So I am excited to learn more about Jorge and his journey.
yeah, no, Jorge Elorza, you are a leader amongst leaders. And as Nique says, someone who's running an institution that was willing to buck literally the party line. And we're going to learn a little bit more about Jorge and his organization, Democrats for Education Reform. But Jorge, welcome to The Invisible Men.
It's an honor to be on here with you, Ian and IQ. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no, it's excellent, excellent. So we'll get into it in a little bit, but Jorge has been the mayor of Providence, Rhode Island. So he's run for elected office. No, that means he's truly a brave soul. And now he is the CEO of Democrats for Education Reform, which is a very important organization, especially within the Democratic Party, fighting oftentimes teachers unions and others that are opposed to school choice. But I'll let Jorge, give us a little bit more information on that. But Jorge, before we get to, the man you are now and all of your accomplishments, we'd love for you just to tell our audience a little bit about yourself. When you were younger, when did race become a thing for you? When was it evident that your skin color somehow mattered in a world that otherwise you thought was not a thing?
Yeah, there's a lot there. So let me start of all places at the beginning. I am the son of immigrants, and if they're we all have different dimensions to our identities. If there's one dominant one for me, it's being the children of immigrants. So I was born here in the United States, but I grew up in an immigrant household, very much in an immigrant neighborhood. And to your question about when did I notice that sort of race and identity, I grew up always knowing that we were different. I grew up. I was born in the mid 1970s, so I'm a kid of the 90s. I grew up listening to hip hop, and there's a Jay-Z line that I love. He says in an intro to one of his songs, he says, "I'm from the hood, and not the rap hood, the real hood." And that's where I grew up. And so we always knew we were different. There was dominant society, what we saw as white families that were just more established, more financially secure. And we always knew we didn't have all the things that they had. And there weren't too many, white families in our neighborhood. We were almost all Black, Latino, and Asian.
Where was this? Where was this?
This
Yeah,
is
where
in
was it?
Providence, Rhode Island. Born and raised in Providence, Rhode Island. I
Okay.
grew up. I grew up on the west end of Providence. If anybody knows it out there. But anyways, I grew up with one thing sort of embedded in my brain from my parents, and that's education, education, education. So my parents' story is the classic improbable immigrant story. Came to this country, literally crossed the border, undocumented, all that stuff. My mother has a fourth grade education, my dad a third grade education, but somehow they knew that the ticket to a better life was in education. And they were willing to um, um, overcome or take on any challenge so that my sister and I could have a better life. And so, those sacrifices, like we lived them, right? It was just like visible, present every day. And I'd love to tell you, Ian, I'd love to tell you, Nique, that I was that kid that listened to mom and always did the right thing. But
Yeah.
life doesn't work so neatly like that. I was a bit of a dunce in high school. I barely graduated from high school. My life was really going nowhere. And so my high school graduation, really one of the most pivotal moments in my life, I found out I was graduating literally a week and a half before graduation day. And I remember my graduation day. Everybody, all my friends are there celebrating, and I'm sitting in my seat just zoning out to myself, thinking like, what the heck am I doing with my life? All of my friends have gotten accepted into colleges. I've gotten rejected from everywhere that I applied to. My parents had made all of these sacrifices, and I was giving it all. I was giving up all these opportunities. And so, right then and there, during my high school graduation, I remember just being so upset at myself and resolving that I would do the best I could for the rest of my life. And I haven't been perfect, nobody's perfect, but I would do the best I could for the rest of my life to show myself and show my parents what I'm capable of and that their sacrifices were not in vain. So that changed everything. Education changed my life. I enrolled at community college, and then I got really, really lucky. There was a program at the University of Rhode Island that was actually, interestingly, created by the state of Rhode Island after the assassination of Martin Luther King, an affirmative action program that got inner city kids into college. So they gave me an opportunity with a scholarship, and they believed in me. They gave me a shot. I worked my butt off. I went from barely graduating high school to graduating first in my class at the University of Rhode Island.
Oh my God.
And so I graduated high school, and by then I'm a hotshot, right? I'm too big for Rhode Island, so I had a business degree. I was moving to New York City. I was going to make some money and live that life. And so I moved to New York City, took a job with PricewaterhouseCoopers. And then the second really pivotal moment in my life happened about 9 months after I moved out to New York. My dad calls me in the middle of the night, one of those calls, and tells me that one of my best friends from my old neighborhood had just gotten murdered, my friend Jose. And so, I remember it like it was yesterday. In my bedroom, I sat up on my bed, sort of like, just crying for my friend. And again, I asked myself, what the heck am I doing? I'm supposedly one of the kids that made it, right? And what am I doing to give back? And what am I doing to prevent other Jose's from going in that same direction? So literally that next day, I handed in my notice.
Wow.
I packed up my stuff, came back to Rhode Island. I thought I was going to be a high school teacher, but that wasn't the right fit. Someone randomly recommended that I think about law school. I said no. I mean, I had never seen a lawyer that looked like me, right? We ask kids to envision themselves as something, but it's hard to envision something you've never seen before. And so I wrote it off. And then literally the very next day that someone first recommended law school to me, a second person recommended law school. It's one of those moments where you feel like the universe is trying to tell you something. So I looked into it. Before I had gotten rejected from everywhere I applied to. This time I thankfully got into some places. I ended up going to Harvard Law School, had 3 great years there, but I knew I wanted to come back to Providence when I was done. And so I did that, went away and came back and did legal aid for 2 years. Then I went into teaching. I was a law professor for 10 years. I was minding my business until, the public service bug came calling me. And then I jumped into the crazy fray to run for mayor.
This is an amazing story.
Incredible.
And actually, can you just spend a minute or so? Just what is Providence like? I think people have a perception of Providence as this beautiful town. There are mansions in Providence, but there's a lot going on in that city, is there not?
Oh yeah, so it's an interesting city. I think that there are 3 dynamics to it that are really important. The first is we are a university city. So we have 7 significant colleges and universities operating in the city. We're a city of 190,000 people. So, mid-sized, relatively small, but top-notch universities like Brown University, Rhode Island School of Design, folks come from throughout the world to attend. And so we're a university city. Second, we've always been an immigrant way station. So, the first point of entry for immigrants, going back to Irish immigrants, to Italian immigrants, to, eventually Latino immigrants coming from South America, Southeast Asia. And so we've always been a very inviting city. We've always been a very welcoming city. And part of what makes Providence so dynamic is this potpourri of cultures that makes up all of who we are. And then the last piece that I think is really important about Providence is the food and arts scene here is really special. And you know, we're very metropolitan. We're a worldly city, right? We have immigrants from throughout the world. We have universities that attract folks from throughout the world. And once you're here, there's a lot to keep you here. The neighborhoods are beautiful, but like we're rich in arts, culture, and our culinary scene is top notch. So you know, there's just as a city, it has a lot going for it. And you know, I'll tell you, there is nothing better in the world than becoming mayor of the city you grew up in. And I thankfully had that opportunity.
So, Jorge, Ian and I have the privilege of hearing these remarkable transformations that people undertake. And every time I hear one, I'm like, how do we bottle that and put it in a juice? Like, if someone asked you, how did you make that decision to commit to excellence at the bottom, at your greatest failure? What is that, and how do we transfer that to young people?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, um, yeah, like a few things come to my mind. The first is that I think that if you talk to any successful person, the secret of their success, I think almost everyone will point to failures in their lives that help them turn things around. Um, you don't have to hit rock bottom, but getting your lumps along the way builds that grit and that sense of purpose that folks need. And so when I talk to young people, I always encourage them to frankly always have your your reach extend beyond your grasp. If you have never failed, it means you've never fully pushed yourself, and hence you've never realized your full potential. Um, you know, I so failure, I think, is just a really important part of this, a really important part of this process. The second is broadening your horizons, and in particular when we talk to young people. We ask young people to make life charting decisions at a stage where they just know so little about the world and everything that exists, and it's really important to commit yourself to expanding your horizons wherever it is that you are in life or your circumstances. Push yourself beyond what is comfortable and your usual. So you got to see the world. You really got to see the world and experience it. Then the last thing that really speaks to me, very much related to that, is with young people, there's so much of an emphasis on discovering who you are, or finding who you are. And I think that's really, really important, right? Be true to yourself, be honest, look in the mirror with honest eyes, and just understand who you are and don't compromise that. Just as important, I believe that we don't just find ourselves, we also build and make who we are. And approach life with the perspective that we are a glass that you know is not yet filled to the brim, and it's our experiences, it's our decisions that are going to determine who we become. And so let's be very intentional about that. Let's be very thoughtful about that, and leave space in who we are for unending growth. And so, that insight about not just discovering who you are, but building and creating who you are, I think is really important for young folks.
Right. And Ian, just one more before we move to the next
Yeah.
section. There's so much to talk about. But Jorge, talk to us about how your parents felt when you became the mayor of their hometown.
I mean, you can just imagine. I mean, they're like incredibly, incredibly proud. Um, if there's one thing that's always been true in my household is, my folks are very humble people, and they've never told me this, but you just kind of understand it. Doesn't matter your position or your title. If you come into our house thinking that you're better than anyone else in here or out there, you better think again, guy. And so
Yeah.
that's just how we are. And you can imagine my parents never imagined that, that, I'd graduate college or go to law school or, name the thing, up to and including, becoming mayor. But I'll just give you this example, maybe shed a little bit of light into like to how we are as a family. So my dad, he's one of the wisest and funniest men like you'll ever meet. Everyone loves my dad. So when I was like 11 or 12, I was really into sports cars and I wanted a Lamborghini. And my dad sat me down and he told me, when you graduate from college, I'm gonna buy you a Lamborghini. I'm like, all right. So, whatever. You make a promise to a kid never forgets.
Yeah, especially that one.
Yeah. So I graduated from college and I said, Dad, you promised me a Lamborghini. Where's my Lamborghini? He said, Mijo, son, I never thought you'd graduate from college. Oh, that's the kind of, we keep it light in the family.
That's great. And they're both still alive?
They're both
Both your
still
parents?
alive, thankfully. Yes.
Oh, that's beautiful. And so they're close by.
They are
Are they?
close by and they are like the best grandparents that a kid could ever ask for. So they help a whole lot. In fact, I don't know how my wife and I would do it without the help of our grandparents.
Yeah. Wow. 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 Okay, so then let's talk about you were a professor of law for 10 years in Rhode Island. So were you recruited into mayor? Was there a big issue that you were frustrated by and you decided to raise your hand and say, I want to be the one to come help fix this?
So I can't say I was really recruited, but I also can't say you know, that I was one of those folks that, I was born for this, right? It's just a matter of time. And in fact, the opposite. I'm a deep introvert by nature. A very private person, and I was always hesitant to take on any public role. But what happened was, it was about 7 years into teaching, and the mayor at that time reached out to me and offered me a judgeship on the Providence Housing Court.
Oh, wow.
And I thought about it a great deal. I decided to accept the position. It was a part-time judgeship, and it was sort of my dipping my toe into the public service waters or public role. And this is in the middle of the foreclosure crisis. So there are abandoned properties throughout the city that have just been laying there vacant, blighted properties for years. Nothing was being done about it. And so I took the bench, and many of these cases came before me, and I got a taste of how much of an impact you can have in these public roles. And even though I was a law professor, I always like to keep one foot in the world of doing, and
Mm,
having a real impact on the world was just, absolutely sign me up. So I did that for about 3 years, and then it turns out that the next mayor, he was not going to run for reelection. He was going to run for governor. He had been the housing court judge before me. He stepped down to run for mayor, and a lot of folks compared us and said, "Well, you're the housing court judge now. You could step
right.
down and run for mayor." So folks started reaching out, and I really wasn't very interested at first. But then it's actually schools and education that did it for me. I ran for office because I wanted to transform the schools, right? I talked about my friend Jose and the path that he went down. I have so many stories of incredibly like bright and talented friends I grew up with, but they went to a different high school. Their lives went down a different path, and and they found themselves in really tough shape, really tough circumstances, and I wanted to do what I could as mayor to make sure that every young kid would find success and be exposed to opportunity, not as a matter of overcoming every obstacle, but as a matter of course, just what we would expect, for every young person. And so it was really my interest in addressing education policy here in Providence that led me to step down from my job. I stepped down from my faculty role and jumped into the mayor's race.
Got it. And was it a tough race? Like how did you blow out your competition?
Hardly. It was totally naive, to be honest with you, Ian. I didn't know what I was jumping into. Um, but sometimes you got to shoot your shot and just trust that you'll figure it out as you go. And so, I built a team. The fundraising is always a challenge. I did all the fundraising work. And, I was able to just capture the imagination and, recruit a lot of young people onto my team as volunteers and develop a vision for the city that resonated with our residents. And so I was able to win, and then I got reelected 4 years after that. And then I wish I could have signed up for one more term. I was term limited, so I couldn't run. But I spent
Oh, I
8 amazing years in office and loved every second of it.
Wow. Okay. Got it. Okay. Excellent. Excellent. So then, all right. So Providence, Rhode Island, but your vista started to expand. Your interest in education clearly ventured beyond what you were seeing in your hometown. Um, and you've now become the CEO of Democrats for Education Reform. So why don't you just spend a few minutes first letting people know what DFER is all about? And full disclosure, I run public charter schools, and as some of the listeners may know, when we opened up our high school in the Bronx, the teachers union sued us to try and prevent us from opening. And we had to have a long court battle. Thankfully, we were ultimately victorious. But there is this influence of the teachers union in particular that I know DFER's origin story um, is very connected to in trying not to let the power of teachers unions have such outsized influence, particularly in the Democratic Party. So tell us a little bit more about DFER and then some of the things you're working on now.
Yeah. So I think the simplest way to understand who we are and what we do is that we live at the intersection of policy and politics and education. And what we do is we build relationships with elected officials, and we find folks who want to lead boldly on education. And then we support them with all the tools that we have. Sometimes it's policy tools, sometimes it's messaging guidance, sometimes it's political support as well. Because the reality is that with education, the incentives don't align for elected officials to directly take on education issues. First of all, because education is really complicated, right? You pull here and it unravels here. No one is really in charge. And so as an elected official, there are no shortage of pressing issues that you can take on. And what's different about education is that you don't know exactly if this intervention or this policy that you're going to pursue is actually going to have a payoff. But what you can be certain of is that if you're ruffling feathers and upsetting the status quo, there's going to be a really powerful special interest that comes that comes after you. And so, a lot of elected officials, they follow the incentives. there are a lot of worthy causes out there that don't cause as much consternation within the party. And so a lot of people don't take education on. But, I never thought of myself as a career politician. This wasn't a stepping stone to the next position. And I ran because I wanted to transform the schools, and that's it. I was going to do what I believed was right, and what our kids needed. And I'll tell you this, that I learned, and it's part of what I do in this job, and when I speak with other elected officials. So I was elected mayor in a deep blue city in a big union state. And I think it's fair to say that I was sort of like this at loggerheads with the teachers' unions for 8 straight years. And, I left office. This is, post George Floyd, where everybody was angry at everyone. I left office with a 60% job approval rating. And so, the mistake that a lot of us make, that I think a lot of electeds make, is, buy in to this idea that, you have to be aligned with this special interest or with this union in order to, be effective at your job. But that's just not the case. I'll tell you this one last story that I'm really, it just like sort of heartens my heart every time I hear it. And it gives you a sense of just how I ran the city and now, how I'm running this organization. So it was after I left the mayor's office. I was out for a walk at a park, and I saw this woman that I had known from, the community and doing politics. She asked me what I was doing. I explained to her what we do at DFER. I could tell that she really didn't understand like what I was doing. But as we were signing off and saying bye, she says to me, "I don't know what you're doing, but I support it. Because I know that whatever it is that you're doing it for all of us." And and that's my guidance to every elected official out there. At the end of the day, what you really want is your people, your constituents to know that you are fighting for them, and do what you think is right and be guided by that. And that's how we're operating DFER as well.
Got it. Okay, so let's get into some of the issues that DFER is focused on. So again, full disclosure, Jorge and I are working on an op-ed right now that we hope will be published by the time this episode airs. But why don't you talk a little bit about the federal tax credit and how we're trying to encourage governors across the country to opt in?
Yeah, if I could just give a little background, so even before we get into this actual like new bill, look, when I became mayor, I didn't come in waving the ed reform flag, and I didn't because I didn't even know what ed reform was. I was always supportive of charter schools, but in my mind, I thought I want to fix the schools where 90% of the kids go to school. That is my focus. Right. And I set out to do that work. And, let's just say that I received an education on the politics of education. And I saw how the forces of the status quo were so powerful, right? There's just so many forces, including institutional inertia, bureaucratic sort of like cover your butt cultures, but then also, the teachers' unions and their entrenched interests. So you have all of these forces that protect the status quo, and I saw how difficult it is to catalyze change. So that by the time I left office, I was not only open, but I was I fully came to embrace alternatives to the traditional public schools, yeah. And that's what led me to embrace charter schools. And as I learned even more about private school choice, not just public school choice, but private school choice, it just resonated with me, right? Public education is a goal, right? And our goal is to have an educated populace, and we should be open to any tool that helps us accomplish that goal. So whether it be traditional public schools, whether it be public charter schools, whether it be private schools, religious schools, whatever it is that helps us accomplish our goal, of having an educated public, we should be open to. And so, I saw that many folks
Sure.
on the left, our party still sort of begrudgingly came to kind of accept that public charter schools exist, so public school choice. And for me, I just came to see that there's no reason to stop at the public side of choice. Private school choice also
Right.
makes sense for both policy and political reasons. So, anyways, with all that said, in the so-called Big Beautiful Bill, there's this provision that creates a federal tax credit. So, you can read about the details of it online, but the short of it is that now there are monies that will become available to states to utilize for either enrichment activities outside of public school or for scholarships and tuition to pay for private schools. The one catch in this bill is that every state governor has to proactively opt in. So it's launched this national conversation in every state about whether states should and will opt in. And as I've said on the record, I think it's a no-brainer. This is literally free money that states can take advantage of. And so Ian and I have been working together, and we're both separately making the case more generally that this is an incredible opportunity for states to not only receive all of these extra funds, but to get creative in how we utilize them to provide more opportunities and a better education for kids. So that's something that we've been making this case, or I've been making this case before the Big Beautiful Bill was passed, which put me in the minority in the Democratic Party. But it's really interesting. Things have changed pretty significantly since this Educational Choice for Children Act (ECHA) was passed, and now you have a lot of folks on the left that are saying, well, actually, this is something that we should take a look at. So that's the project we're engaged in.
Yeah, so let's just go drill deep, because a lot of our listeners might hear that description. We've also talked to Darrell Bradford, who leads 50 Can. What would be the rationale for someone to be opposed to this, right? As you just laid out, there's philanthropy. People are able to make donations to scholarship generating organizations. Those organizations then in turn provide scholarships to primarily low income kids, either for tuition or, as you say, like kind of a la carte, tutoring or other things. That sounds pretty good, right? What would be the reason that someone legitimately is against this?
So yeah, you mentioned rationale. So rationale implies reason. Uh, so that we're talking about like using logic. There is no reason to be against it. Now there are interests that are against it, and so of course, labor, public teachers unions, they have come out against it for the same reason that they've come out against public charter schools. This is really important to understand about teachers unions. I'm not talking about teachers. Like teachers are some of the most good-natured, good-hearted
Yep.
public servants on this earth. So I'm not talking about teachers. I'm talking about not only teachers unions, but in particular the executive committees of the teachers unions, the ones that sort of set policy. So anyways, for them, they're not necessarily education policy experts. They're labor experts. They know the ins and outs of every state's contract laws, arbitration laws, the grievance processes. They are experts at that. They are labor leaders. So their interest is, their memberships and their members. They've always been opposed to public school choice, to charter schools, because by and large, charter schools are not unionized, right? And so, as their interest is labor. They don't represent those members, so they're against it. And in the same way, they're against these public dollars potentially going to non-public schools because it doesn't increase their membership. And if anything, it opens minds to the idea that education doesn't have to take place in, you know, this kind of school building that's run by a public school system. And they're concerned, you know, if folks get a taste of, you know, choice options, they're going to like it. And you know, they see this as an existential threat, and so they've been against it. And so I don't think so. That's, I guess, the logic behind the
Yeah.
interests that oppose it. And then by extension, you know, so many folks in our party, in Democrats, have you know, also been really slow to embrace forms of choice, because our party has had this political alliance with the teachers unions for a very long time. They're one of the biggest contributors, if not the biggest contributors, to the Democratic Party. You know, they have membership throughout the country, and so they volunteer for campaigns. They build relationships, and you know, the last point that I'll make is, and you know, I think it's really important to be clear on this, in that, you know, I actually don't begrudge any interest group, including teachers' unions as an interest group, from advocating for their interests, right? That's how our
Yep.
democracy is set up. And we shouldn't expecting them not to advocate for their interests would be naive. The folks that I blame when education policy goes awry are the elected officials that should be saying no to all of these vested interests and adult interests when it's not in the best interest of kids. And so, you know, that's why people are against it. And I'm hoping that more and more Democratic electeds, they will be coming out in favor of this, because it'll benefit kids. Period. And that should be always be our guiding light.
Yep. And just to you, one of the criticisms you leveled is that, you know, the folks say that this somehow is taking public money away from the system. But again, these are philanthropic dollars, right? These are newly created donations to nonprofits, who then in turn um, allow kids to essentially use those, earn those scholarships, and then use them to pay for various educational interventions. So there is no, just again, just to solidify, is there any public funding impact with this federal tax credit?
Not at the state level. You know, you can make the case that at a school level, so if you're using these federal tax credits that, as you mentioned, they come from philanthropic contributions. So if you're using these dollars, and a child who would otherwise go to a particular school now uses it for tuition to go to a private school, so that school district might lose some per pupil funding. But a state can
Oh,
change. A state
right.
can change their formula and how they calculate it. As far as the state is concerned, the state doesn't lose any money, and the state can determine how they allocate, you know, funds through their formula. But yeah, no, you know, that's why this is a no-brainer. Folks will, you know, stretch the case and make the argument that public schools are going to suffer, but that's just not the case. That's bunk. You know, it's just, you know, show me your incentives and I'll show you your outcomes. And, you know, it's clear that special interest groups have incentives to oppose anything that gives families options outside of the traditional public schools.
I mean, maybe just the very fact that you call this a no-brainer, and I agree, and yet there's still pretty powerful forces in the Democrat Party that seem to be opposed to this. Is that indicative of a larger set of issues within the world of education? And so, would love to get your thoughts, kind of raise this up now beyond this tax credit. How do we move forward when it just seems we're so divided? And ironically, in the world of education, there used to be quite strong bipartisan consensus on things like charter schools, on choice. Like we can park our, you know, our differences at the door, but at least we can all agree that every kid, especially low income kids, should be given a shot. But now it seems even that we can't seem to have consensus on those kind of core points.
Yeah. So I'll share with you why I'm optimistic about this moment. And again, it's about incentives. So schools have been underperforming for a very long time. Um, but what is different now is that Democrats have begun to suffer political consequences because of that. So, for example, 10 years ago, Democrats were considered the undisputed party of education. Everything changed after COVID, though. Today, depending on which poll you look at, it's clear that that advantage has evaporated, and we're very likely underwater when it comes to voter trust on education. Who do you trust, Democrats or Republicans? And so, while schools have been underperforming for a long time, what is different now is that now Democrats have a political imperative, right? A political incentive to refocus on education. So, after the November election, we're going through this soul searching process.
Yep.
In general, there's an openness to new ideas, and there's even more of an attention that's being put on education right now because, when you look at the communities, the voters that are drifting away from the party, working class, black, brown voters, to them, choice is yet another 80-20 issue that Democrats are on the wrong side of, right? And so now we're armed not just with making the moral case or the policy case, now we can make the it's in your political best interest case. And, that starts to get their attention. So I'm optimistic that in this moment, Democrats who want to lead on education once again are willing to, expand the bounds within which the debate is taking place and consider some issues that in a previous era were just too easy to dismiss because the politics didn't align. We're entering a new era. Look at how much the Republican Party has changed over the past 15 years. Democrats have been like late to react to this new reality. We've just started back in November, but the change that is coming from our party, in my opinion, is really significant. And so, whereas the logic of the past says, it doesn't make sense to take on education, the politics are too tricky, there's no assurance that that logic or those assumptions apply tomorrow. And so I'm really optimistic and excited about, working with elected officials, helping them see the possibilities and filling in that void of the lack of guidance and the lack of vision that has been shared, from the national party, and help policymakers at the state level, really lean in and be bold in this moment. There is, this. If there ever was an anti-establishment moment where folks are
This is it.
distrustful of existing institutions and want something new and different, it's now. And I think it would be wise for Democrats to capitalize on that.
Okay.
Well said. Well said. I think that's an appropriate transition to another segment we have within the podcast that we call the speed round, Jorge. So I'm going to offer up two individuals or two events and ask you to pick one and tell our audience why. Some are fun, some are a little bit tough, but we'll start with our go-to, which is Malcolm or Martin.
Malcolm.
Tell us why.
He had. Martin Luther King was really amazing. Um, what I always appreciated about Malcolm X was, first of all, his story, his background. Like, talk about like hitting rock bottom and that inspiring you forward. I've always, and we're just talking at the margins here, but I always sense that Malcolm X just spoke in a more direct way to the realities that folks faced in their everyday lives. And Martin Luther King, I mean, he was just so inspirational, so aspirational. Um, but I always felt that Malcolm just had a way of speaking to lived experiences
Mm.
in such a deep way, and he always just resonates. Maybe sort of like a slight tick and notch with me
Yeah.
above MLK.
Understood. This one is based a little bit on some insights I have on some of your hobbies. So, Tour de France or World Cup?
Oh, World Cup. Oh, absolutely, World Cup. You know the what I love about the World Cup is you got to root for one team, and you can root for a different team like every time, but like you got to really, really want them to win, and then a goal just counts for so much, so that when your team is close, it's so exciting. When the other team is close, it's so nerve wracking, and so you just got to emotionally live these games, and so World Cup.
And the last one may be tough. I don't know, but President Obama or President Clinton?
Obama, hands down. So
Oh,
President Obama he's the reason I got involved in politics. I had never really paid much attention to politics, but his 2008 election was the first one that I followed like from beginning to end. And what I what I learned from Obama was this sense that there was actually a place in politics for like good-hearted, well-meaning, like honest, conscientious people, and he brings out the best. He's always brought out the best in us. So he very much inspired me to even consider a life in public service. So, hands down, my favorite politician of all time, President Obama.
Amazing.
wow. Of all time. That's significant. Well, I guess I'd have to ask, it is interesting these days to look at the Democrat and Republican Party. As you say, they both have changed so dramatically. And obviously, Trump is an outsized figure in the Republican Party. But what do you think of these numbers of the Democrat Party that are so low? Lowest popularity levels. Is education, is school choice, is that the ticket out? You think or is there more of an overhaul that's needed?
Yeah, no, Dems have serious, serious challenges. So, we've only look we become a party of the elites, and we become a party of powerful special interests at a moment when people are as anti-establishment and thirsty for change and something new as we're ever going to experience. So there is this populist moment, probably a global populist moment that we're living through, and we've been caught flat-footed by it. Think about how much the Republican Party has changed over the last 15 years, right? The party of Trump has almost nothing to do with the party of Ronald Reagan, just 15 years ago, where Republicans were. And I think it's reasonable to expect that the kind of change that Democrats have to go through, it's going to be a very messy, messy period. It's gonna take some time, but I think that we are due for a really significant change in who we are. And you know, I think like a public intellectual that perhaps my favorite public intellectual is David Brooks, and he made a great point recently where he argues that Democrats were still approaching this from a Clinton, Obama, Pelosi, Biden worldview. And what is required is just a whole different approach to what we do. And expecting the, a leader from the existing infrastructure, someone who has
Right.
excelled in it, someone who has benefited from it, someone who is of it, expecting them to deliver us out of this is probably unreasonable. And very likely what's going to be required is an outside voice or a series of outside voices that can steer us in a new direction. So as much as I'm looking for who's going to lead our party, more so I'm looking at like who's going to transform our party, who has the capacity to transform like what we stand for, even at a cultural level. And I'll just leave it with this point because at a certain point it's about policy, but you know, I think that you know policy and politics is downstream of culture,
Yeah.
and there is something at the world view level that Democrats have to reconcile or address, and I'll relate it to education. There's so much in the current debate about what kind of accountability are we going to place on these new and innovative models, and I get what that comes from. As Democrats, we look out for the little guy, and it's almost embedded in us, deeply ingrained in us that you look out for the little guy by protecting them. And I think that there's something really powerful to be said about looking out for the little guy by empowering them, by giving them agency. That's a very different approach than we take. But it's a different, frankly, view of human nature. And
Yeah.
I told you, I'm from an immigrant community, and look, I'm not, ascribing any sort of normative beliefs on this. I'm just describing the world the way it is. Within our culture, in Latino culture and immigrant culture, I think every immigrant is like this. We don't see ourselves as victims, right? We see, talk about like, crossing the border, you know,
Yeah.
you
Seriously.
know, taking on and willing to absorb any sacrifice, whatever is necessary. This idea of, you're actually very powerful, and there's agency in that. That's something that we need as a party to do a better job of tapping into. And I feel as though we don't sometimes. So to put the bun on this, Ian, we both believe in school choice. And, I believe that, what happens when you give people when you empower people to make decisions over their own lives, they make good choices. They make the choices that are right for them. And
Right.
we should lead with that generally as a party.
Yes. And there's dignity in affording people those opportunities, right? So, I mean, Jorge, when you were thinking about the leadership of the Democratic Party going forward, I hope that you are looking at the man in the mirror. If I echo Michael Jackson, that was really phenomenal. Well, then let's close with you maybe now imparting wisdom. You've just given a roadmap for the Democratic Party to think about. Let's make it more personal and connect these ideas of agency and dignity and not being fearful and not seeing yourself as a victim to Daryl, 16-year-old black kid living in forgotten USA who unfortunately hasn't, unlikely has had the benefit of meeting people like you, Jorge, who has this outsized vision of what can be accomplished. What would you tell Daryl about navigating his way in our country when he's got this perception that, the systems are rigged against him?
Man, 16 years old. There's just so much. Um, I don't know. This is my best attempt at imparting deep wisdom. If he's 16 years old, I would tell him to think back to when he was 12 years old. 4 years have passed. And my guess is that he would say that he has changed profoundly in those last 4 years. He's just grown as a human being. He has a better understanding of the world, and he's just grown a great deal. Well, I would tell him that in the next 4 years, from 16 to 20, he is going to grow and change just as much. The next 4 years, 20 to 24, he's going to grow and change just as much. And this is going to happen every 4-year period maybe for the rest of his life. And I would tell them to just chew on that and lean into it.
There it is. Okay. Well, Jorge, thank you so much for sharing your words of wisdom. I'm so inspired that you are leading DFER. It's a very important organization, and in particular, in this moment, when our political climate is so divisive, maybe there is a pathway to lead your party. And my hope is that education and school choice is the anchor, because maybe that's also the pathway to bipartisanship and consensus, that creating opportunity for the rising generation is what hopefully brings us back together as a country. So thank you for everything you do. Nique, I don't know if you've got any parting words for Jorge.
In this case, I do. I mean, Jorge, what a pleasure. You know, you are yet another example of why this country is so magnificent. You know, and I think about your parents, as you said, with elementary school educations, but PhDs in America, and giving you the tools to take advantage of what makes this place so great. So, pleasure to meet you, and thank you for everything you do.
Thank you. Been an honor being here.
All right. All righty. Thank you. And for our listeners, thank you for joining us for another episode of The Invisible Men. Other episodes can be seen at www.invisible.men. We're also on Spotify, Apple, wherever you listen to podcasts. And so until next time, and thank you, Jorge.